Hello, this is Kevin Bowersox, creator of the blog 2Thought. In today's tutorial, we're going to further explore JPA and JPQL. In particular, we're going to focus on using named queries, as well as other features of JPQL, such as functions and joins. For those wishing to follow along with today's tutorial, you can visit the 2Thought blog to find the base code for this tutorial. It is located within the text accompanying the blog entry, Intermediate JPQL Queries. The final version of the code in this tutorial is available by clicking the GitHub icon located below the post. So let's get started. Before we begin writing JPQL queries, I need to create some test data. To do that, I'm going to use a test util I've created, which will be in the code provided. And I'm just going to run that, and that should populate some of our database tables. We'll head over to the database to check that out. Okay, and what that did is that created several posts and then several post parts. The post parts being pretty much the body of a post, and the post being kind of the header information for it. Now let's head back to STS. We can close our test util, and we're going to create a named query. A named query allows us to predefine a JPQL query within one of our entities. We can define it pretty much anywhere, but an entity is the best place because it puts the query next to the relevant code. To do that, we use a named query annotation, and this is a class level annotation, and we provide a name for it. Usually it's recommended that you use the entity name and then something that describes the actual query itself. So I'm just going to call this find posts, and then we specify the query element, and this uses a JPQL query, so I'm just going to write a very simple one. And at this point we've defined a named query. These are beneficial because it allows us to realize performance gains. This query will be constructed once when the application starts, and it will never need to be constructed again. Let's put this query to use. I'm going to copy its name for later use, and then I'm going to create a new test within our test package, and I'm just going to call this test JPQL test 2. And now I need to grab some of our Spring test configuration, which I'm going to copy, put that in there first. I'm going to copy from our JPQL test from a previous post, and we'll provide those annotations, so we now have transactionality, and we need a persistence context. Okay, and we'll import those two objects, and we'll have a basic test, and this is we're going to run a query that's going to return a list of posts, and now we call the create named query method on the entity manager, and we can supply the name of our named query we just created. And I'll handle my imports. And now we want this to be a typed query, so we specify the class. We'll need to import that class. And we can get the result list. And now we can iterate through that list and we'll print out the title. So let's give this a shot. Okay, so we just used a named query to pull a list of posts from the database. Let's further explore some things we can do with named query. So I'll head back to the post class, and when we specify multiple queries, we need to put them in a named queries annotation, which accepts an array of named queries. So I'm just going to take our first named query and place that into the annotations element, and I'm going to specify another named query. And for this query, what I'd like to do is return a teaser. So let's imagine we have just a list of all of our posts to a blog, and we want to display the title, the author, and a little section of the body. JPQL will allow us to do that. One of the issues we face when attempting that is that the post contains the title and the author, yet the post, the body of the actual blog post is in post part. So JPQL will allow us to do a join in this situation. So we can select the title, the author through stamp, which is an embeddable, and also the body. And you notice I gave that a different prefix there, pp, and that's because we need to do a join. And when we join, it needs to be, when we join, it needs to be through a relationship established on post. And since we have our post part set up as a relationship in our entity, we can access the post part through post just by specifying the field name on post that contains the post part. And then I'm going to give this an alias. Okay, let me see if I can format that. And it appears that I cannot. So I'm just going to split this up so you can see it a little easier. And I'm going to grab the name of our query, and we'll head back to the test. I'll make sure I save everything. And we'll create a new public method that will be a test. And we'll test out our join. So I'm not going to specify the declaration of the object yet. We'll do that in a minute. So we're going to create a named query, give it the name of the query, and then get the result list. Now, you'll notice in our query that we're returning 3 fields, a title, an author, and then the body from a post part. We don't exactly have an entity defined to handle that. In situations like this, the query will return a list of object arrays. Now, that's not optimal, but we can iterate through that list and we'll print out the author. Whoops. Which will be, let me check. I'm sorry. Let's print out the title first. It's going to put the values it returns. Each one of the columns will specify to an index in the object array. So our first index will specify to the title. The second index will specify the author. And then the final index in that array will specify the body. Okay, so let's cross our fingers, and I'm actually going to remove this test annotation so it doesn't run. Let's cross our fingers and hope it works. Oops. And that's what happens when you create a private test. So much for my Eclipse templates. So let's now try to run it. Okay, you can see that we retrieved all of the posts and we got the author, the body, and the title for each one of those posts. So our join was successful. We had to iterate through the list of object arrays and specify the index to pull out the column value that we would like. There's a better way to do this. Let's head back to post and take a look at our query. So we have three attributes coming back: the title, the author, and the body. JPQL will allow us to strongly type these results with a few tweaks. And to do that, the first thing we need is a class. So I'm just going to create a new teaser class. Within that class, I'm going to make a private string title, private string author, and then another string teaser text. I'm going to generate getters and setters for all these, format that class, and then one other thing we need is we need a constructor that contains all of the fields. We can make those all very quickly with Eclipse. So I'm going to save that, and I'm also going to grab the package name, because you'll see when we use the constructor later, we need to use a fully qualified name, class name for the constructor. So I'm just going to put that down there for later, and I'm going to duplicate our existing test and give it a new name. And now, to strongly type these objects, we just specify new and then the fully qualified class name, and it's a teaser, not a taser. Okay, let's get rid of our little helper there with the package. We'll save that, head back over, and we're going to create another test. I'm going to tell this test not to execute, and we'll give this a new name. And now it's going to be a little different because we do need to strongly type our query. So we specify that it returns a class of teaser. We can get rid of this nasty object array, and we can replace that with our teaser type. Really want to use a taser. And we can get rid of these calls to the index and get the title. get the author, and get the body. Oops, it's a teaser text, not the body. Okay, so now we're strongly typing the results from this query. Let's see how that works for us. And it doesn't. Now let's see what's going on. If you remember how careful I was earlier to copy these method names, well, I definitely lapsed in this one. So we need to grab the right query name. You'll notice we were running against post.teaser, which doesn't have the constructor. So let's run against the named query that does have the constructor. And now everything's better. There are two more things I want to demonstrate, which I feel are important. And so to check those out, let's go back to our post entity. And we have this body. We're displaying the full body of the post. JPQL provides us with functions we can use. So we can substring. Let me pull that down so you can see it. And it's pretty easy. We just need to surround the field that we would like to substring and provide it with first the position to start in. One thing that's very important, this is not zero index. So if you want to start at the first position, you put in 1, not 0. And then we give it a length. So I'm going to take the first 200 characters, and instead of returning the full body, we'll just return a section of it. And the other thing I want to demonstrate is that we can also add parameters to named queries. So I'm going to filter these by the name of our author, which means I'll need to go through the stamp to get the author field. And we can see now I didn't bother putting in a new query, so we can just use our existing test setup. But let's look at what we did. We're using a substring function to trim that body, using the 1 as the index of the first character in that string, and then we just add a named parameter to the query. And if we head over to our test, let me do a little bit of setup here. Nice display message. Now we need a scanner. Grab that input, import those. Now we're going to need a string to hold the value from the scanner. Okay. And I would really like to format that. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it will allow me to do that. Okay. So now we need to provide our parameter. Remember, our parameter's name was name, and then we'll give it the name that we enter. There we go. Allow me to format this time. So we're supplying the named parameter so we can have a conditional where clause on our query. Remember, here we get the benefit of protection from SQL injection because we're using the named parameter. And remember, we're also substringing using a JPQL function. And there's another issue. Guessing it doesn't like that query. So let's head back to our query. And you can see there's no space here. So it was going from pp, it was looking for pp where as well as making pp where the alias. So let's go back to the test. And another thing I forgot to do was I didn't wildcard the parameter we're supplying, and if I'm using a wildcard, I also need to change this to a like. Okay, all that fixed, let's give it a go. Hey, things are looking good. Okay, so I'm going to supply an author, and you can see we return all of the teasers for Kevin Bowersox, and you can see that some of our bodies which were substringing are getting cut off, so that's working properly. I probably should have put a lower value in there to demonstrate that, but all is well. You can test it. You have the source code. So we covered a decent amount today. Let's just review quickly. We created several named queries, which we have to put in a named queries annotation, which has a value element that accepts an array of named queries. A named query annotation has a name element and a query element. When using named queries, we use the create named query method on an entity manager and supply it with the name of the query. In JPA we can also, in JPQL we can also perform joins. Where's the join? Oh, here's a join. So when we join, we may get result sets back that are not entities. When we do not type our query, we need to deal with a list of object arrays. The object array will coordinate with the columns we've returned. So the first column we specify in our query will be in the first index of the object array, and the second will be in the second index of the object array, and so forth. We can also use some functions in JPQL which are supplied. We use the substring function, which takes 1 for the first position of a string. We can also use parameters within our queries. Here you can see an example using a named parameter, and we simply set the parameter like any other query. So that's all for today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. We're going to keep exploring this JPQL theme, I believe, next week. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.